the long-running saga of R. Kelly. I don't know of a single artist that has had as precipitous a drop as R. Kelly, nor do I know of anybody who has had such a public airing of the sickness. I mean, this is really, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around the nature of this man's illness. Also, the women involved, and we're going to find out last week a man was involved as well. So this is all from last week, but a guy was 2 men were involved, and all I can think of is we now kind of know the price a person is willing to pay in order to find fame or find artistry or whatever, I guess you could call it. Because every single one of these people in this case, victims all, stayed, and their stated reason for staying was that they wanted to make it. And look, R. Kelly was the biggest name in music at that time, at the time of his biggest success. I mean, you couldn't touch him, I think, in terms of R&B. And every time he got caught up in some kind of a scandal or something like that, he came out with new music and just crushed it with every album. So it's really, I can totally understand somebody being enamored by someone of that level of success, being interested in them. But at a certain point in time, it seems to me that you have to put yourself and start thinking about, is this really worth it? Is this something that I really want to be associated with? And what's very interesting, and I'm going to read about this from recent, a number of actually reporting from last week's trial. But what's interesting about this is the response of the men as opposed to the women. And in this case, this guy Louis, or Louis, I keep calling him Louis like he's French, but Louis. So I'm going to read from this, and then I'll talk about it again on the other side. Week 3 of the R. Kelly trial, and the first male victim appears in court. I think we can safely say that he is quote-unquote nephew from the testimony from last week. As I discussed last week on this show, nephew had sex with one of the Jane Does I suspected to be Azriel Clary. That sexual encounter was what Jane called quote-unquote punishment, and it was against her will. But on the stand, the man testifying went by the name Louis, and he testified he was a teenager when he met Kelly. He was an aspiring hip-hop artist, and that Kelly began making sexual advances on him. And this is from the New York Times, dated August 30th, in an article entitled, R. Kelly's First Male Accuser Says the Singer Promised Fame for Sex. And it's by Troy Clausen. And it goes on to say Lewis testified the two met around 2006 when Lewis was a senior in high school and working at a McDonald's in the Chicago area. The singer gave him and another worker his phone number. While in the drive-through line, Lewis testified. Lewis said that his mother called Kelly hopeful that the entertainer could help further her son's music ambitions, and Kelly invited the family to a party at his mansion. Afterwards, Lewis twice traveled to Mr. Kelly's studio. Their first sexual encounter came after the singer invited Lewis under a similar guise, he said, and then asked if he had any fantasies involving men. As they continued to meet, Lewis said Mr. Kelly began to call him a little brother, told him to refer to him as Daddy, and recorded their sexual encounters. He took friends to some of the singer's parties, and Lewis said Mr. Kelly asked him to keep bringing back one of his best friends. The friend was a 16-year-old boy who later received Mr. Kelly's phone number. Mr. Kelly began having sexual encounters with him too while he was underage. At another point, Lewis told jurors he and Mr. Kelly met at his home in Olympia Fields, Illinois, in a garage setup as a workout area. Mr. Kelly snapped his fingers 2 times, and Lewis testified a naked young lady crawled out from under the boxing ring that was in the room. Mr. Kelly instructed her to perform oral sex on himself and then on Lewis, he said. Mr. Kelly seemed to become agitated by Lewis's testimony, wiping his head and clutching his mask. As Lewis spoke, Mr. Kelly shook his head and folded his hands. Lewis recently pleaded guilty to attempted bribery for offering money to a potential witness against Mr. Kelly if she agreed to stop cooperating with the government. He said he did not want to testify on Monday, but entered into an agreement to do so in exchange for the government notifying the judge on his case of his cooperation. Also last week, another accuser and aspiring artist testified that she went backstage after an R. Kelly concert and was sexually assaulted by the singer. The woman named Addie was 17 at the time, and she goes, quote, "He started getting a little bit more aggressive," she said, and directed her to the back of the room. He held her wrists, unzipped her shorts, and had unprotected sexual intercourse with her. "At this point, I was in complete shock," she continued. "I just went blank." Afterward, Addie and her friend ran out of there, she said. Her friend wanted her to contact the police and press charges, she said, but Addie feared that she would be blacklisted from the entertainment industry if she did. "I don't even know if they would believe me," she said. "I didn't want to be victim shamed." So I think it's important to remember what Kelly is being charged with here. And you can sort of get muddled in this, but he's charged on a RICO standard. He is charged with racketeering, and it says in this is a CNN, by the way, article. The use of racketeering in this type of case is unusual, but former federal prosecutor Wu praised it as a bold and creative use of the law. It's a very aggressive use of racketeering, actually, which I commend, because it's recognizing that for someone to have been an alleged abuser of so many other people, that they have the help. Alleged abuser of so many other people that they have to have help. Oh, so in other words, in order for this guy to have gotten away with this, he had to have had help. So it goes on to say racketeering became a federal crime in 1970. At the center of any racketeering case is the enterprise, the group entity carrying out the illegal conduct, such as the mafia. In this case, the enterprise is Kelly and his entourage, as well as his managers, bodyguards, drivers, personal assistants, and runners. According to the superseding indictment, Kelly is described as the leader of the enterprise. The purpose of the enterprise were to promote Kelly's music and Kelly's brand, to recruit women and girls to engage in illicit sexual activity with Kelly, and to produce pornography, including child pornography. Kelly's defense attorney has criticized this aspect of the case against his client. Kelly is charged with racketeering that has 14 underlying acts. One act of bribery, 3 acts of sexual exploitation of a child, 1 act of kidnapping, 3 acts of forced labor, and 6 acts of violating the Mann Act, which I believe the Mann Act is the one where you have infant children cross state lines in order to engage in sex acts. The alleged crimes stretch from 1994 to 2018 and are based on incidents following 6 anonymous Jane Does, several of whom were underage. The oldest incident is the Bribery Act from 1994, which alleges that Kelly and his enterprise bribed a public employee to create a fake ID for Jane Doe number 1. Sources familiar with the matter confirmed to CNN that Jane Doe number 1 is the late singer Aaliyah, who was 15 at the time and married Kelly. This is something that I don't go into. There's an article, part of one of the articles is from last week, the minister who married Kelly and Aaliyah on the stand talking about what happened. I discussed on this show last week this incident, particularly with Kelly's former manager, I think he was a former manager who arranged to have fake IDs and arranged to have this marriage put together. The family later annulled that marriage. So that's part of this bribery act. To convict him of racketeering, prosecutors have to prove that Kelly committed at least 2 of these 14 underlying acts. Charging Kelly with racketeering has a few benefits to prosecutors. For one, it allows them to charge a broader pattern of conduct that stretches over years and involves many participants. In addition, a racketeering case combines multiple victim stories into one trial, which can create a Me Too-like dynamic. Remember, this case right now with regard to Lewis, with regard to Addie, going back last week, we have this case. The cases which involve the other Jane Does. These are all a pattern. I'm going to read 2 more cases. These are all a pattern that they're trying to build up that is a part of this racketeering situation. The trials of Bill Cosby and Harvey Weinstein, though not racketeering, show that having more witnesses testify about the pattern of alleged that sexual misconduct can have a powerful impact on the jury. He goes on to say, the Mann Act. This is the one that was talking about. 6 of the racketeering acts and 8 of the standalone charges against Kelly are based on violations of the Mann Act, once known as the White Slave Traffic Act. The Mann Act was passed in 1910 and sought to criminalize what is now known as human trafficking. The law initially criminalized transportation of a woman or girl across state lines for the purpose of prostitution or debauchery, or for any other immoral purpose. The vague language around the immoral purpose meant that it was used to punish consensual sexual activity and common sex work, often against black defendants. Most famously, the black champion heavyweight boxer Jack Johnson was convicted by an all-white jury in 1913 under the Mann Act for transporting a white woman reported to be his girlfriend across state lines. He fled the country for several years before returning to serve just under a year in prison, and the conviction derailed his career, ruined his reputation. Donald Trump pardoned him posthumously. The Mann Act has since been amended several times and now criminalizes transporting any person across state lines with the intent that such individual engage in prostitution or in any sexual activity for which any person can be charged with a criminal offense. This is one of the reasons why, and we're going to talk in a minute, I'm going to go over this BuzzFeed article with this woman, Faith. But in every one of these cases, they talk about how he flew them to another location, how he flew them to, here, there, and other places. Faith was 19, so she's not a minor, but Azriel Clary from last week, she was a minor. Just about everybody from last week was a minor. So that is the reasoning why, just in case people are wondering why they're bringing up all of this stuff regarding Kelly and repeatedly this behavior over and over again. This guy, Lewis, also, and his friend, apparently they're going to Illinois, they're going to here and there, You might think, oh, well, that seems like a wonderful life. You're jet setting. Well, prosecutors see that as violations of the Mann Act. That this is a guy who is having these victims shipped across state lines so that they can engage in sexual activity, engage in immoral behavior, and that's against the law. Let me talk about this next article. BuzzFeed article entitled "A Sixth Alleged Victim of R. Kelly Said That He Gave Her Herpes and Filmed Her Without Consent." This article is by Julia Renstein, and it details testimony from another woman named Faith who testified last Wednesday. She gave graphic details of the venereal disease and her non-consensual sexual encounter at 19 with Mr. Kelly. In much of a repeat of prior testimony, the artist met Faith at a concert and was given permission to go backstage, where she met Kelly and was given his number. The article goes on to say she then visited him in a hotel room where they had sex. The article goes on to say, quote, Kelly did not use a condom, even though she asked if he would, she testified. He said, "We don't need no condom," Faith said. Immediately after the sexual encounter, Faith said Kelly was critical of her sexual performance, saying she had a lot to learn. He also allegedly questioned whether she might be under the age of 19, but seemed unperturbed by the possibility. He said, "You know, if you're really 16, you can tell Daddy." It was during their relationship that Buzzfeed News first reported that police had been informed that Kelly was allegedly keeping women in an abusive cult. As reports of the allegations began circulating in 2017, Faith said Kelly seemed to be on edge and asked whether she would protect him. Faith continued traveling to visit Kelly on the road after the coming months, saying he was extremely controlling. In January 2018, Faith said he made her strip naked and then questioned her about her sexual history while he sat on a chair and had a gun beside him. He then allegedly made her give him oral sex. The next month, she visited him in Manhattan and said Kelly tried to have sex. She clenched her body so that he could not fully penetrate her, she said, which pissed him off. He finally gave up and began masturbating at high speed while watching videos of sexual encounters with his girlfriends on his iPad. Kelly, at the mention of the masturbation incident, put his hands over his face for several moments, seemingly embarrassed. This is Kelly in the courtroom. Faith began pursuing legal action after she tested positive for herpes, and she later appeared in the documentary series Surviving R. Kelly. She was contacted by a woman employee of Kelly's who said she wanted to discuss some files she had. They met up at an Applebee's, Faith said, where the woman told her she was trying to figure out who's telling the truth and who's lying about the allegations against Kelly. There, the employee showed Faith a file on her, which included nude photos Kelly had taken of her. If Faith moved forward with the documentary, she testified, the employee warned her Kelly would make those photos public. About a week after the docuseries began airing, Faith said she woke up to a flurry of messages. She found out a Facebook page entitled Surviving Lies had publicly posted the same nude photos she'd been shown in the file. Reuters had an article entitled R. Kelly Accuser Says She Reached a $200,000 Settlement After Herpes Diagnosis, and it's by Tyler Clifford, and it's from September 3rd. The woman who identified herself as Kate and said she was 27 when she met Kelly, and that Kelly was tight-lipped when she accused him of giving her herpes. Kate said that she settled with Kelly in 2004 and that the herpes diagnosis greatly affected her ability to enter future relationships. Kate told defense attorney Kanek that Kelly behaved differently around her, letting her go to the bathroom when she wanted and not making her wait around for him for long periods. She also said she helped him write down song lyrics. So not only is R. Kelly a rapist and a child sex predator and engaging in child pornography because he recorded all these incidents that he had with these underage children, but he's also like Typhoon Mary. He's everywhere he goes. He's giving people herpes, these women herpes, and we learned, I think, in the first week of this trial, that he knew he had herpes because he was treated by his doctor who was on the stand. After his testimony, there begins to become story after story after story after story about him having unprotected sex and giving these women herpes. Why is that important in this case? Well, I'm going to tell you why. Again, I'm going to go back to the same article, CNN article that I mentioned. So part of this involves the Mann Act. Again, it says in Kelly's case, some of these Mann Act violations are related to more serious offenses such as aggravated criminal sexual abuse. However, 3 of the violations accuse Kelly of knowingly exposing Jane Doe number 5 and 6 to herpes without informing them and getting their consent, which is a misdemeanor under public health laws in New York and California. Wu, this is the prosecutor, another prosecutor not involved in this case. Wu said it was unusual to include misdemeanor public health violations in such serious federal case. He theorized the prosecutors included these stigmatized allegations in the indictment mainly to show the extent of Kelly's bad behavior. And if prosecutors hadn't charged him with these violations, they may not have been allowed to introduce them in the case because of evidence rules. So by charging him with transmitting herpes without permission, it obviously adds to the image of how indifferent he was to people's lives. And, you know, there is almost in every one of these occasions, the guy knows he has herpes and he's having unprotected sex with these women. And you have to go into what is going on in Kelly's mind. And all I can think of, you know, this is rape. I mean, this is about power. This is about power and dominance over these women. He is using his power to dominate these women, to control these women and men, by the way, because he knows that they want him for his fame and his fortune, and he is going to use them up as much as he can and give as little as he can to them. Because if they ever become uninterested or not involved or not interested in playing the game, he's going to cut them loose. So that's who he is. And the fact that he's totally indifferent to the fact that he knows he has herpes and is giving it to these women is just even further proof of how indifferent this man was, and how much of really this was an assault on these folks, women, and in this case we learned last week, men. The trial continues this week, and I will report on it also later this week as it unfolds, probably next week on the next podcast.